So this is the site in Terry Hills. The German International School in Sydney had actually contacted our studio to work on a master plan for the whole school. The first part of it was a new science center, which is shown here. So that's a new science center that's currently in DA with council. We're waiting for the approval, which should happen pretty soon. But as part of this, the other thing that came up was that they needed more space. So the existing classrooms were pretty cramped and they're rather small classrooms. So while the school is not extending the amount of students, they just needed more space. In particular during construction, that will be relevant as well. So we were asked to provide 3 demountable classrooms, which I've shown there. So this was just an image of the science center. I'm just mentioning this because this will also be a mass timber building. It will probably be the first certified CLT passive house building for a school in Australia. So the brief from the school was pretty straightforward. They needed 3 portable flexible learning spaces for 24 students each to ease the pressure on the existing classrooms. They wanted it to be as energy efficient as possible, but actually accepting that if we're talking about demountables, the expectation is not that it is highly sustainable and to be cost efficient. Our task was essentially just to organize some demountables from some of the companies who've been doing this for a long time. We've then been looking into this a bit more, and we all know what demountables usually look like. We also all know that demountables, while they're meant to stay there only for a couple of years, they often end up staying there for 20 or 30 years, which means the impact is much bigger than it's first thought. It became a bit frustrating for us to look at the costs involved in purchasing those demountable classrooms and then seeing what you get. I mean, most of them start with a PVC lining for the wall finish, which when you're talking about sustainability is probably not the best thing to start with. So going back to the brief, we essentially said there needs to be a better way of doing this. And that's when we contacted Andreas from Reg Pacific, because we had done several projects with him in CLT. Previously, we know his expertise, and we sat down and said, oh, there must be a way that we can develop something similar, but just better, and come up with an outcome which is based on timber rather than on a steel structure, and work with the Passivhouse standard. So some of the key features of those new demountable classrooms now are, they are essentially Australia's first Passivhouse demountable classroom. And as I said, the Passivhouse standard will be more explained by Andreas later, but what it involves is a 90% reduction in the heating and the cooling load. We've got a heat recovery ventilation so that you get constant fresh filtered air supply into the building. The project is then obviously built from renewable resources using cross-laminated timber for the structure and the internal finishes, and use the timber for the cladding. Essentially, the building starts as with a carbon negative footprint of the structure because it stores 55 tons of CO2 in its structure. There's almost no construction waste, 97% usage of the CLT mother panel. We're using highly insulated airtight envelope with triple glazed thermally broken windows. And then the building has been fitted out with solar PV to cover the building's usage and supply all the extra over to the campus. But the main goal was still for this to be achieved at a similar cost to other demountables. This is just a quick cross-section of how the classrooms are made up. So you can see the solar panels on the top. We're using, obviously, increased insulation compared to a normal building to achieve the Passivhouse standard. We've got an air tightness layer. We're using cross-laminated timber for all of the structure and partially for the buildings because of the structure. The triple glazing, thermally broken window system, and the heat recovery ventilation, as you can see in the back. These are the 3, this is just a side plan, the 3 demountable buildings within the context of the school. At the bottom, you can see the existing some of the existing classrooms, which were built from containers about 6-7 years ago. And this is like an extension to those. The spaces are all flexible learning spaces. So based on the 24 students, we've got a 3.5 square meter per student, which allows you a very flexible use of the space. In principle, obviously, the spaces are very simple. They're made up of 5 modules each. So each unit is 5 modules because all of these were prefabricated Waco Pacific. You can see just an elevation and a section of the spaces below. These were the renders that we produced for the school to show what they could look like and how they would be sited within the context of the school. The colors were taken from the existing container buildings in the background to work with that. And this is the view of the internal space, using the CLT also for the window seats, and have essentially as much exposed as we can and are allowed to. This is just a little video which we put together when we built the model, which was actually pretty good to explain to the school how this whole thing comes together, because we realized when we were building the model that it's more or less built the same way that it is built in reality. So you've got all the pieces from the CLT slab getting prefabricated, pre-cut, pre-routed, and then the prefabrication from Waco Pacific in the factory in Canberra, put together those single modules, and at the end of the day, they're all getting delivered to the school, put in place, and we'll go from there. And now I'm just going to show some images of the project. I have to apologize, I haven't got real photos from the outside because we had so much rain that we didn't get a chance to take photos which show the fully completed and finished buildings. This is one of the classrooms. You can see we've used a large cladding for the outside. All the buildings are settled within existing landscape. Obviously, that needs to be a little bit redone. Taking up the colors from the existing containers in the background. You can see some of the detailing here. Interior of the space, pretty close to the render, I would say. We've got an acoustic ceiling, which is also based on a timber product. We've got the window seats, the triple glazed windows, large sliding door to the back. You can also see in the background the heat recovery ventilation, and we've got an air conditioning unit sitting there as well. So some of the things I guess Andreas will be explaining a bit further, but you can see the shelf in the top, which was put in not only for aesthetic or design reasons, but also to reduce the costs of the CLT structure and together with the shipping and breaking up the height of the space. Essentially, it's a pretty simple classroom, about 85 square meters. We've got some built-in joinery on which you can see on the left side. There's a screen, whiteboard, everything you need for a classroom. Lots of storage. Again, whiteboard, pinboard spaces within the joinery to be used. Doors, again, same system, all triple glazed doors. And a view out the back with the large sliding door. And some more details. Some views from the exterior. So all of these little classrooms are connected with little ramps and platforms on the outside. So you can see landscaping still needs to be finished. Hopefully we'll get some sunnier days now. But what's really beautiful about those projects, and also the way that they have been delivered with the installation of those modules with a crane, was that they could be sited within existing landscaping. Some of the details of the facade, the large cladding, and then the three classrooms have the different colors within those window reveals, within those deep window reveals. Again, that correlates to the existing container structures behind. This is so in reference to the little time lapse we had earlier. This is now the time lapse for the real project. So you can see the buildup of the modules in the factory in Canberra, which were then delivered with trucks to site. So 5 modules make up 1 classroom, and you can see the installation here. There was some, as probably everywhere, issues with supply of some materials. Hence the timber cladding went on later. The original aim was to install the timber cladding in the factory as well, but due to supply issues, that was done later. And that was the third classroom. And yeah, that was about my part. And Andreas is, oh sorry, now I've got one more thing. Just in terms of the carbon footprint, we have stored about 53 tons of carbon dioxide in the project's mass timber. We've probably avoided around 20 tons if we had built this conventionally in steel, which is an equivalent of taking 16 cars off the road for a year in Australia. And I think the most amazing fact I always find is that the whole timber used here is regrown within 15 seconds within the forests it's been taken from. And now I'll pass on to Andreas for the next part.
Good morning, everybody. What I've got there is just a little slide of Passivhouse, but before I start, I dare to say Knut has said everything and hopefully inspired everybody to think a bit more lateral and to take matters in hands that actually can do. Just from a big picture point of view, it is very clear, no matter what we think and what we do, real buildings today and in the future are all electric. And real buildings, no matter what they are having no electrical consumption outside of daylight hours. This is happening at very lightning speed at many places, and we just need to embrace that one. This particular classroom designed as such had the same aim, being all electric, looking after themselves and starting totally out in a carbon neutral, or even better in that sense, negative, carbon positive, carbon negative, climate positive, etc. But the aim is the same. We don't have a footprint anymore, carbon production. So this is all going that negative way in a positive manner. It's a bit of a word mix in the whole lot. I've been asked to just remind ourselves about Passivhouse. It is a voluntary building standard. It comes out of Central Europe and Northern Europe. And amazingly enough, no matter what Wolfgang Feist has done nicely as part of his business, it was interesting that vividly over 7 countries developed exactly the same thing, gave them different names, from Scandinavia all the way to Switzerland and Austria and Germany and everywhere in Italy. We've all came out of the oil crisis saying, got to change.
Can you, yeah, sorry, Andreas, you're having a bit of sound problem there.
Is there a sound problem?
Yeah, I think your mic's scratching across the clothing or something. So,
okay, is that any better? Is that any better?
Yes, it is. It's good.
Wonderful. I probably don't go back. Yes, it's a voluntary building standard. It has been developed. It continues to be a voluntary building standard and is way ahead of every national other building standard where it's being used. While energy efficiency has been the key driver to get out of the blocks, out of the oil crisis, it really has rapidly evolved into building health rather than energy efficiency, because that there was then what we mucked up in the early days, because we simply shifted the dew point into our interstitial fabric and made a mess out of really unhealthy, really moldy buildings. That has been resolved, that has been matured. So science has got to work, particularly building physics, and it creates really, really healthy buildings. By all means, if you look into the healthy building, what it needs, you end up intimately, directly into very high efficient buildings as well. And of course, from a user occupant point of view, comfort has been the thing that's been driving us to adopt those buildings. And then from a financing point of view, because everything new was more expensive when it started out, the banks have started to really offer extremely attractive interest rates, deals. I mean, cut it in half in order to get us out of the blocks, and it worked extremely well. And their driver was the longevity of the buildings that don't really go bad anymore, and the resale value as a result of that one has given them a much, much better control over the risks of their finances. If I discuss only briefly key features of Passivhouse, I dare to say, please don't mix that with passive solar. Yes, it's nice to have the natural light. Yes, it's nice to even have solar radiation coming in. What it really is, and I refer to that one all the time, to me, until I find something better, it's an architectural escape. It's a box, beautiful architecturally as it can be, that is seamlessly insulated. So there's nothing that goes through that box in terms of high thermal conductivity, call it steel or concrete or others, because it's just totally seamlessly insulated. And of course, the next bit there, it's got to be air sealed, it's got to be airtight to relatively high performance values. That means a lot of things are properly taped, are sealed up. There's nothing of a bodgy installation allowed anymore. That's the easy bit to control from a construction point of view, because the blower door test, a vacuum or overpressurization of the volume shows you very clearly how many leaking points you've got. And if you accumulate up all the leaking points, you get to values that are just acceptable or non-acceptable anymore. I probably would like to open a bracket remark here. I say that out of experience at my institute in Switzerland and everywhere in reality. Don't make buildings more airtight. Don't do that. Make them either totally airtight or totally leaking, because everything in between will mold out, I guarantee you. So you've got to brace that one completely, leave the building code as dodgy as it is and make it even more open. Of course, this counteracts many other things, particularly energy efficiency, or else take it seriously, because we've got to get that moisture diffusion under control and we've got to seal it up. I close the bracket there again. Then it's kind of a bit of a myth still that we don't really need triple glazing or decent or super glazing in there. Australia's conventional high performance double glazing windows and doors that you and I buy on the market here, they, if you express their thermal performance in R values, which is a heat transfer value that we know from buying insulation, you'd hover around 0.4 to 0.5. You see all these wonderful super glass buildings going up. They basically comprise entirely glass and they're called energy efficient buildings, but they basically have no better insulation values than just a little brick wall. So we've got to go and reconsider that one a bit more seriously. And then of course, the fourth bit there is quite important too. Everything is totally fresh aired inside. And that means when you cannot open windows or doors out of your entire building because the outside climate doesn't allow you to do that, there is a mechanized filtered fresh air lung that goes through the building. In a European context, we always spoke about comfort ventilation, bringing us comfort inside the building, knowing we've got filtered wonderful air to go through it. There is a little booklet shown, or at least the cover of the booklet, Passivhouse in Australia. It's been produced and printed by the Australian Passivhouse Association. Highly recommended reading. It's an ebook as well. Just download it and get inspired. Now, I'd love to kind of stop here, but I still have a couple of photos only that I want to present. I'm not sure what sort of audience mixture there will be at the moment, whether I'd go more into technical things or not, but let me just step through so we can gain time at the end of this seminar for lots of questions. When we bring CLT buildings, we'd like to get them into high cube containers. This has been a 12-meter long timber sledge, and we had to make sure that per classroom, we use that space, and everything had to be designed to go on a sledge. We put it out of the containers when they arrive at the wharf. We put that onto super tilt trucks and off we go to site or to our factory. In the factory itself, yes, you could say it's a big mess, not necessarily, because we try and stack everything in a reverse order so we can peel off from the stacks what we need to go and assemble. Dear Kristen is not too religious in that, but he kneels down when he works. He was just installing the acoustic timber insulation panels on an upside down piece of ceiling. You might see here from a connection point of view, we screw feed everything together. We've got compression screws that tie everything together where they need to be, and then we completely shear connect them together with fully threaded dowel screws. So there's been a lot of screws going into these classrooms to put the structure together. What this particular photo also shows, underneath, we've chosen to insulate in the factory with XPS. That was a choice that we had to do. You probably might have noticed it's an extremely moisture stricken site there, and we didn't want to go with any other insulation, make our life easy, and that is pre-stuck to a 6mm fibrous cement board. Everything had to be ballerated and fireproof as well. Embedded in the entire roof structure, we developed brackets for lifting. They stay in the buildings just in case those demountables would ever need to go and demount, and those are actually embedded inside the entire insulation. The photo shows the top side of a roof with the rafters that are designed to go above the roof, because we had basically 7.5 meters to span, and I had not material to allow for, not the budget to allow for then others than having 100 mil thin CLT ceiling. So when you are pushed to do that one, you've got to go and create other structural elements to help out. And I shifted them from inside to outside to keep the neat, seamless ceiling in there. But that gave me other options to attack structurally and to help out with entire lifting. We look pretty attractive in these sort of suits, but that's been needed in the summer to assemble everything, particularly to handle the rock wool, the non-combustible insulation, which was required to go on there. On the left-hand side, you see one of those panels that we stick on with some very smart European technologies that are sort of glue-on direct attack nails. One of our people has got one of them in the hand. You probably can't recognize, but that insulation bit has not been one of our favorite works. Once it's together, you've got the rough CLT buildings on floors and the ceilings, as I indicated before. We mounted the entire acoustic ceiling panels onto the roof while the roof was on its back, and then flipped and lifted everything up there. What you also might see, there's a bit of black lines in the sort of middle and the back there. This is all taped. So all of the joins between CLT panels left and right and everywhere have been fully sealed and taped forever, helping us with the air sealing and with the waterproofing. Good news with this particular building, in spite of the weather we had, these classrooms, none of them has ever seen a drop of rain, neither from transport from Canberra to Sydney, nor during the installation. Before we came, it rained all the time. Afterwards, it didn't even stop anymore. If you go inside electrical and data, we routed them into the CLT panels. We completely embedded them. We sealed them off, and we ran the entire conduits deliberately, this time outside in the ventilated cavity, not under the insulation, which is mounted on the outside of the CLT building. Shifting and loading has been, of course, a thing when you build up in a nice warehouse with gantry cranes. You start making big elements out of it, then you need to get out to lift them out. So we've resorted to little skid wheels. You might see that on the bottom, those little square red ones, where we plonked our modules out there, pushed them by hand very easily to the outside for a friend to then lift onto the trucks. Sometimes, as you see here, sometimes it was helpful to have a little bit of a balance where a person gets a ride to keep things in perfect balance. Once arriving on site, yes, nice look, because lots of semis arrived and the crane was put in place to lift them all together. It was nice to see that every classroom took us 1.5 hours exactly to have it together and waterproofed and sealed. It was pretty necessary with the amount of rain and clouds that was there. But as I said, sheer luck, we didn't even have a single drop of rain anywhere where we assembled and transported. The entire supports was piers, should have been originally a matter of kind of shore feet, but the ground didn't give that one. So we resorted to using up some of concrete that we didn't want and some steel. On the inside, Knut hinted, we used our own triple glazed and insulated thermally broken windows. I pushed very hard to use Australian glass, and we got them out of Hobart. Thank you, AGG, for that one. Yes, much dearer than European glass, but if you count out on a per classroom basis, we had an increase in costs of $2,500 to get the triple glazing out of Australia. That's kind of a percent of the, or less, a bit more than a percent of the dollar figures. It's all in the big picture. Knut also mentioned we installed air conditioning there. We have a small unit out of Italy that has no external units at all, because when you do prefab, you don't want to play with external devices, and you want to keep things as quick and as plug-in as possible. This particular unit from Olympia Unico in Italy is particularly an air conditioner and dehumidifier, which in the Sydney climate is the most important bit. Heating, it probably doesn't even know how heating works up there because it's not needed. But very comfortable, very easy, and very smart to use. Once all those buildings are together, it's nice to have big pictures from aerial view, but when you walk through that one, you really have the feel of a village school there with very nice buildings. And the first building got occupied by an Austrian young lady teacher there. She walked in there, she took a breath and said, it smells like at home. And I told her it's actually from her Styrian forest. She was completely over it, and she knew exactly what was in there. Overall, I'll leave it here. I thank everybody, but most importantly, Charlo and Tristan and Yumi, and of course, Darko and Matt and Scott and Robert, because without all of them, we would have never made that. I just put a brief remark in there. Our containers sat in Singapore for 7.5 weeks without further explanations because they couldn't get them out. So here we are before Christmas trying to deliver classrooms basically for the next school year. And we had 2 decisions to make, either go left or right, say, stop it won't work, or work totally through. We've chosen to work through and deliver on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreas. Yes, very insightful. A little bit of a personal note, that particular school location is about 200, 300 metres away from the primary school I went to all those decades ago. And if you ever want to go and see the transformation of schools over the last 70, 80 years, go there, because there's schools, wooden school back in the 1930s to the concrete stuff they have today. But we've got plenty of time for questions, and I'll mediate those for you. So we'll kick off with the first one. We have a question which is from anonymous to say internal acoustics, reverberant noise. So I'm probably one for the architect, Knut.
Yeah, so you might have seen that on the photos. We've got an acoustic ceiling on the underside of the CLT, and that's for 2 reasons, and that might actually answer the next one as well. We needed a group 1 or 2 rated ceiling for the classroom, so we couldn't expose the CLT in the ceiling, unfortunately. But anyway, we needed an acoustic ceiling anyway, so all of that is the design panel, which is the wood wool-based product to counteract the reverberant noise, and the acoustics is pretty good in those spaces.
Okay, excellent. So one for Mario. What was the FRL for the site, and how did you circumvent the issue?
Yeah, so essentially the FRL on the interior, as I mentioned, so the walls need to be a group 1, 2, or 3 rating, which the spruce timber has. The ceiling needed to be a group 1 or 2 rating, and then the floor has a smoke index of, I think, less than 2.2 kilowatt or something. We've got a linoleum floor in the space, and as I said, the ceiling's been handled with the Hera design panel.
So the fire resistance level, because there's a Type C building, and I think it's 3 meters away from each building, there wasn't any fire rating at all to deal with.
Yeah, and that's been actually part of the way that they've been set out, was to make sure that we are 3 meters away from any existing building and also within the new block of buildings. So they were set out in that way.
Okay, excellent. That's yes, a lot of people don't realise that the low level mass timber structures can be exposed. There's lots and lots of concessions inside the NCC that allows you to work with, and concessions allow you to expose the mass timber. It's not that hard. You just need to be careful going through the NCC, and it does give you allowances and things like that. If you want to know more, just contact WoodSolutions and they'll be able to give you help. A question from Nick Hewson. Good morning, Nick. What was the final cost of the finished classroom in dollars per square metre, if we're allowed to ask? Is that something for Andreas?
Happy to do so. Roughly $2,300 a square metre.
Okay, it's delivered to site cost, is that?
Yeah, installed, done. With all the equipment and all the appliances and all the everything in there.
I guess that's something that is worthwhile noting. We just had a meeting with, like a webinar with USs, who were essentially saying it is now impossible to build anything under $4,500 a square meter.
Oh, there you go. Prove that wrong. All right. Moving down the list. So one from Michael. How does the mass of the timber used in the construction compare with traditional frame timber building?
Can I add to one of those, please, Knut? CLT adds a lot of thermal mass, and it is not as perfect as a masonry wall, but it helps an awful lot to thermally balance out. We designed everything for a time lag of 12 hours. So to shift the entire construction for extreme heats or cold away by 12 hours from when they occur. So heat waves in the afternoon might reach the internal of the building 12 hours delayed in the middle of the night. And this one makes for when the building is closed with doors and windows during heat waves or during severe cold, is keeping the weather completely out there. So that's quite often not really comprehended, that mass timber is adding so much benefit compared to a timber frame construction with relatively fluffy glass wall bats inside.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that one.
The insulation, of course, on CLT buildings when attached to the outside is then totally seamless and totally homogeneous. And we've chosen, as per Knut's desire and our discussions in that, to leave all of the CLT walls and ceilings naked because of their capability to work out extreme conditions of humidity and extreme conditions of CO2, let alone of odor. They really do their biophilia operation very nicely.
Can you get a comment on that one?
No, I think Andreas probably mentioned everything. Yeah.
Yeah, look, and I'd just add as well, because of the mass of the timber, the moisture wants to balance with the environment. So in a humid day, it takes the water out of the atmosphere. On dry days, it puts it back into it. So it's likely to spend most of its time closer to the desirable relative humidity. It's a known element, and there's some research out of Scandinavian countries that support all that. Okay,
I can actually just mention on that one, while I'm sitting here in our little studio, which is also a CLT building, built essentially very similar to the classrooms. Our main house has had about 88% relative humidity inside the house for the last couple of weeks with all that wet weather. This building has stayed at 68% all the way through for the last 3 weeks with no change in humidity.
Excellent. That's what I would need. All right, let's move on. Another question from Michael. Michael. How do you address termite treatment requirements?
Yeah, essentially the way that it's dealt with, we've got the whole building on steel posts and caps. Termite management as usual, and the underside of the whole building is closed with FC sheeting anyway. And also keep in mind that the whole building is airtight, so there are no gaps or anything in there.
Okay, so just additional.
If I may add, please don't design buildings that are in the dirt or in the wet. And in this particular situation as well, the whole building, as Knut says, is on legs, on piers, on stilts. When it comes to termite management, you need to see what you do. And that means it's part of maintenance where visual inspections aren't needed, because termites basically like timber. Whatever they see and they get, there's very few timber species that they're not really much attracted to. And it needs that relatively high moisture. So we can't just close our eyes and say, we've ticked the boxes because we completely spread poisons everywhere around our kids to try and get them under control, or any other way. It's a management issue, it's a design issue.
Okay, thank you. All right, a question here from Alistair. What species was the external cladding used?
European larch. European larch is very similar to cedar. It's one of the timber species in the world with the highest amount of natural polymers in there, and it's been used for centuries. Of course, it grays off because of fungus going in there, and there's no maintenance, there's no coatings and nothing. I can only just add to that one. Our family home in the mountains of Switzerland was built in 1638 out of European larch. It is petrified. I can't get nails in there. I can't drill a drill bit in there, everything blunts. It just become extremely unmanageable or protective in that way.
And that was part of the concept to use just an exposed timber, which is untreated, so that where there's no maintenance involved. And the idea is that obviously the buildings turn silverish gray over time. It's probably going to take about 3 years, I guess, to get to that state. That was the aim from the design point of view. I mean, it's quite hard usually to get timber cladding into schools, mainly for the fear of maintenance, and that's the approach that we've taken here, essentially to take the maintenance out.
Excellent. Okay, moving on. Another one from Alistair. Can you talk a bit more about the air exchange unit, how it operates, and what are its costs?
I've chosen to go clearly away from a centralized unit there, but have 4 distributed independent Lunos Next devices there that can breathe self-controlled at up to 110 cubic meters an hour with the appropriate filters. And you can actually put in HEPA filters if COVID or any other sort of sicknesses continue that we need to attend. And it's got internal heat exchange, and it has 2 high performance EBM published fans, and those breathe from the external side. You might see at some of the photos or notice that there are some external holes, and this is where they can currently breathe in and breathe out. In a completely air sealed building, you need to extract the same amount of air as you want to push in at any time, otherwise you can't get any air in there. Happy to discuss that offline.
Excellent. Please ask to take it up with it, Andreas. Another question from Anonymous. Great presentation, thanks. Yeah, I agree. Regarding the CLT frames that provide the open plan, what sort of connections is used between the column and the beams? And what were the beams as well?
Yeah, just screws. Everything is screwed together. And you give me a TX40 bit and a rattle gun, and I disconnect the whole lot and take it away again.
I think the other thing that I mentioned there is, I don't know if that was explained clearly, but the insulation is continuous on the outside of the structure. So usually you would have timber battens in between at a certain center to put the insulation between, but the rock wool insulation is continuous, and the battens have also been fixed just with screws across the rock wool into the CLT.
Okay, and Andreas, what was it? Were there glulam beams on the roof rafters, or was it CLT used for the roof rafters?
Now, in order to get the effectiveness, I'm always challenged. I don't want to produce any waste. I'm disgusted about constructions that I see everywhere where there's more waste produced than anything else. As Knut said, overall we had 3.4% offcuts of our standard mother panels, and we have also embedded most of the timber from our timber sledges. Everything was built into the entire building. So we really have an extremely efficient way about going that. I want to add for an anonymous attendee before, of course, what you have not noticed when you screw fit those individual 5 modules together, there's a compre band in between, there's a seal in between. There's nothing airtight and nothing open.
Excellent, I actually saw that. You explained that well in the presentation. Another one question from Anonymous. What other application do you envisage as being suitable for this system? Aged care, residential?
Yeah, I agree. Essentially anything that needs to be transported and installed quickly. I mean, generally I see CLT or mass timber as the answer to any building application, but in this case, the modular prefabrication. Yeah, I agree. It could be aged care, it could be residential buildings, wherever you need to build it quickly, and yeah, put in as much prefabrication as you can.
Can you stack them?
I guess you could, yeah. If they were designed for that. Yeah.
The structure I designed for the classrooms can take 2 more stories, just in case anybody would dare.
Excellent. Let's see if we can challenge that one day. All right, Ben has asked, what BEL ratings are the structures, if any?
So they've got a BEL 12.5 rating. I mean, the structure itself, I mean, the BEL rating really only applies to the final outside finish. We've used rock wool insulation in addition to that. And wherever we are close to the ground, we've actually not used the larch. I don't know if you've seen that in the photos, but we've used a hardwood timber cladding, like a bushfire resistant timber.
Okay, moving down, another one from Alistair. Fantastic solution for school and demountables. Well done. Will you be pursuing New South Wales State Government and other education departments with this as a highly suitable low carbon building solution for schools?
We had the Department of Education visit, at least a couple of people were there and visit that. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and in their defence, they are looking at a mass timber school. Still think there's a prototype structure which might have as a future WoodSolutions webinar, and a few people looking at that. So yes, the state government of New South Wales is looking at timber as a solution for schools. So congratulations to them. And we had that as a presentation, WoodSolutions webinar, mid last year as well. If you want to go back and look at what they're doing through the WoodSolutions webinars. Right, thank you, Alice, for that. So Daniel's got a question. Knut, there's The section suggests external wall insulation. There seems to be an external wrap or breathable membrane in the ventilation zone between the cladding. Can you explain the build-up?
Yeah, can I do that, Knut? We've got the CLT inside, which has got a very, very high MVTR, the moisture vapor transmission resistance. So it's basically your moisture control wrap in a sense. Externally, there is no wood fiber insulation there for the bowel rating purposes. So we used externally a rigid rock wool insulation that then was membraned with a Gore-Tex-like membrane from Proclaimer, the Solitex Extazana. And as Knut mentioned before, with battens screwed through that one straight into the major CLT to hold it all in place nicely and to create the vertical ventilation cap or ventilation
cavity.
Ventilation gap there between the cladding and the membrane, so it can always dry out by itself.
Excellent. And just as a note there, WoodSolutions is in the process of actually doing a design guide on condensation and including some Wolfie model systems, roof and wall using mass timber and timber frames. That's just it will come out sometime this year, but we'll have some solutions there, which will just waiting for the NCC, their final version of the 22 version, just to make sure that we line up with that. So we'll have some solutions there to show exactly what is the right way of building mass timber walls with which are pretty much matching what description we just had from Andreas. So well, I'm pleased that we're on the right track. One from Toby, where these modules designed specifically for the site, or were they used in multiple locations in terms of lateral wind, seismic design demands? Was there a maximum lateral demand you designed to?
I took on the weakest side a 3 kilopascal wind loading in there, so you probably blow up to about 250 kilometers an hour or more just to get a bit of elasticity in there. Seismically, the whole lot is together so it can withstand about anything that hits it, as long as, of course, footings allow that one to not fall off. But the modules themselves, they're over-engineered as real independent boxes there.
Yeah, I can probably add to that. The fact you can do 3 stories just says that. So it's yeah, it's
that of course, Andrew, the 3 stories depend then yet again at the wind loads that you've got a particular location. So what Toby asks for, they're very clear. We've got to just sit together and see what the boundary conditions are in terms of wind and seismic loads, and then accordingly beef up or do something else.
Yeah. Design detail, design, structural design, excellent. All right, let's move on. What is the R value of the timber wall as well as the roof itself?
I've got a very simple way forward that achieves the Passivhouse standard here nicely. It's a 2-4-6 rule. That's a rule of thumb. We need an R value of 2 at the floors. We need an R values of 4, an effective one at the walls, and 6 in the roof. And you basically roll through any Passivhouse requirements easily. So this is a combined R value of everything from the mass timber over to the insulation. And that's about it, yeah. The weakest points remain the fenestration solutions, by all means.
And the mass timber already gives us, I think, roughly about an R1 just for the wall itself.
Yes.
Okay, good to know. All right. And another question from David. Hi, is the approximate $2,300 per metre squared building cost still valid for a new similar project now? So you're holding your prices there,
yeah, I might say the learning curve at this seed project was rather steep. There's many things that we all do different at the moment, and they were even faster than we were before. There's quite a bit of optimization, call it value engineering there. I think the site itself is a critical element in all that one. The accessibility really needs to be right because you can have a lot of unexpected site-specific costs. Let's talk.
Excellent, and I agree. Just if you want to know more, talk to Knut and Andreas post this webinar. I think we're running out. We've got one more question, and we're just about running out. And please, this is from Kim. Please explain where you anticipate condensation would occur within the wall fabric. It sounds like
outside in the ventilation cavity. If anything, if there would be high moisture pressure coming from inside because you've got a super party with 10 spaghetti pots turning and 100 people in there, they breathe massively, and outside it's 0 degrees, You've got a lot of moisture that diffuses or wants to diffuse from inside out, and the dew point is in the ventilation cavity. It's not in the interstitial part of the building. You would never get any mold. But of course, after the party, you need to open the windows, etc. You need to get the excess moisture down again.
Knut, would you like to add something to that?
No, but while Andreas just mentioned opening the window, just in terms of there's always this misconception about Passivhouse that we've got a sealed, airtight envelope. That means we can't open the windows. Obviously, all the windows can be opened and are meant to be opened if you've got the right climate outside. You open all the windows. You've got a big sliding doors, big doors, and all the windows are tilt and turn windows. So you can either just have them slightly tilted so you can just get constant ventilation, or you can fully open them as well.
Tell you what, during assembly and construction on site, it was so nice at times to just throw all the windows and doors open because we were desperate for a bit of wind or cross breeze that came in then from the ocean in the afternoon.
Excellent. Okay, I think we've got no more questions there. So at this point in time, I'd like to wrap it up and say thank you to Andreas and Knut for a wonderful presentation. It was very insightful, and as I said, just down the road from where my school was. Just seeing how the development of school buildings over time, and I'd like to see a lot more of these type of buildings being used. So wrapping up there, unless you got any final words, Knut or Andreas, you're all good?
Yep.
I'm just good. I just encourage everybody to take the challenges that we're facing here with our climate with both hands. Don't look for excuses. Everything is doable. We just need to get it done. We don't need to wait for anything to come alive new. Every solution's here. Just adopt it. Just go for it.
Yeah, look, I'd reinforce that. I wish I had a passive house, design house. I'm sitting in an old house in Sydney, which is too hot during summer and too cold during winter. And envious of Passivhouse. And just so wrapping up on that, so we had a bit of a dual presentation, a Passivhouse and this modular school thing. So I hope that's being insightful to all attending. Just a reminder that we'll be sending out a certificate of attendance post this webinar, and the 3 CPD questions are: what timber product are the modules made from? That's pretty easy. CLT. How many modules make up one classroom? That was 5. And look, you've heard so many benefits of International Passivehouse standard mass timber buildings have. So just pick one of those, and your questions are done. So thank you presenters for well and truly killing off those questions. So I just an advertisement for the next one, which is on Tuesday, the 29th of March, and another excellent one on to get your head around is a design for manufacturing and assembly, GLT members, and connection design and detailing, what you need to know. And it looks like we've got a couple of excellent presenters from Australian Sunnable Hardwoods who are going to go through what's necessary for a successful design. So an excellent presentation for our next webinar. Also a little bit of an ad on WoodSolutions. There's just recently they just announced that the environmental product declarations for Australian-wide was up. Australian for softwood was updated. So if you want to get some up-to-date version of that, it always changes the EPD values because the industry is always improving. So if you want to know what they are, please go to WoodSolutions website and be able to download that. So at this point in time, I'd like to now say thank you for attending this webinar. We're a little bit early, but we're all busy. So I'd like to say thank you. I'd particularly like to thank Knut and Andreas for their presentation. I was extremely pleased with it. And we welcome you to see you at the next webinar in 2 weeks' time.